The dust-laden wind carried Penelope Norwood's desperate pleas across the main street of Panamint, California. But Jasper Wilkes merely laughed in her face, the sound bitter as the alkali flats surrounding their parched town in the summer of 1878. "You'll get your wages when I decide you've earned them, girl, and not a day sooner," he spat, his bulbous face reddening beneath his expensive bowler hat. "But Mr. Wilkes, I've worked 6 weeks straight at your hotel. I've cleaned every room, served every meal, and stayed late every night you've asked," Penelope argued, her honey-brown hair escaping its pins as she stood her ground outside the Panamint Palace Hotel. "I need that money for my brother's medicine." "Should have thought about that before you broke that fancy crystal decanter, shouldn't you?" Wilkes sneered, adjusting his silk waistcoat over his protruding belly. "That was worth more than 3 months of your pitiful wages." Penelope's hands balled into fists at her sides. "That's not fair, and you know it. That decanter was already cracked when I dusted it. I've worked honestly for you, and I demand what I'm owed." The small crowd gathering on the boardwalk shifted uncomfortably. Everyone in town knew Jasper Wilkes, the richest man in Panamint, owner of the hotel, the saloon, and half the businesses on Main Street. Nobody crossed him, not if they wanted to keep working in this mining town. "You demand." Wilkes's voice dropped dangerously low. "Let me tell you something, Miss Norwood. In this town, I decide who gets what. You're nothing but an orphan nobody with a sickly brother. You're lucky I employed you at all." Tears of frustration burned behind Penelope's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. At 22, she'd endured worse than Jasper Wilkes. She'd buried her parents 4 years ago, nursed her younger brother through countless fevers, and kept food on their table through drought and hardship. But winter was coming, and without her wages, they wouldn't survive. "I'll work off the decanter separately," she pleaded, desperation edging her voice. "But please, I need the money I've earned." "Get back to work or don't come back at all," Wilkes snapped, turning his back on her. That's when the stranger spoke. "Seems to me a man who won't pay honest wages isn't much of a man at all." The voice was deep, graveled from trail dust, but steady as bedrock. Penelope turned to see a tall figure at the edge of the gathering crowd. Dust covered his long duster coat, and his face was partially shadowed by a well-worn Stetson, but she could see the hard line of his jaw and the steady assessment in his blue eyes. Wilkes spun around, his face flushing deeper. "Who the hell are you to stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" The stranger stepped forward, his spurs making a gentle chinking sound against the wooden boardwalk. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd faced down worse than an overweight hotel owner. "Name's Ryder Sutton," he said simply, pushing his hat back slightly. "Just rode in from Tucson." Penelope noted the well-worn holster at his hip, and the way the crowd subtly shifted to give him space. Not a gunslinger, exactly, but a man who knew how to handle himself. "Well, Ryder Sutton from Tucson," Wilkes said, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is a private matter between me and my employee." Ryder's gaze flicked to Penelope, taking in her worn dress and the proud tilt of her chin despite her circumstances. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, perhaps. "Private matters don't usually take place in the middle of the street," he observed mildly. "And I couldn't help overhearing that you're withholding this lady's rightful pay." "She broke valuable property," Wilkes spluttered. "Did she now?" Ryder looked to Penelope. "That true, madam?" "The decanter was already cracked," Penelope said firmly. "I merely touched it while cleaning and it split along the crack. But even if I had broken it outright, it wouldn't amount to 6 weeks' wages." Ryder nodded slowly, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. The crowd murmured as he tossed it in one hand, the distinct sound of coins clinking inside. "How much does the lady have coming to her?" he asked Wilkes. "This is absurd," Wilkes huffed. "I don't have to." $30, Penelope cut in. 6 weeks at $5 a week. A muscle twitched in Ryder's jaw as he regarded Wilkes. "That seems more than fair for the kind of work she describes." "I don't have to stand here and—" Wilkes began. "No, you don't," Ryder interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "You could pay the lady what she's owed, or we could take this matter to the sheriff. I reckon wage theft might interest him." Wilkes's eyes darted around at the growing crowd. Panamint might be his town in many ways, but even he had to maintain some appearance of fairness. "I haven't got that kind of cash on me," he blustered. Without a word, Ryder appended his pouch into his palm, counted out $90, 3 times what Penelope was owed, and held it out. "I believe this should cover her wages," he said, his voice carrying to the onlookers, "plus interest for her trouble. Unless you'd prefer to fetch the sheriff and explain why you're holding back honest pay from a woman trying to care for her sick brother." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Jasper Wilkes might own half the town, but no one liked a man who cheated hard-working folk out of their due, especially a young woman with family responsibilities. Wilkes's face contorted with rage, but he recognized the trap he was in. With the crowd as witness, he couldn't refuse without damaging his standing in the community. "Fine," he snarled, snatching the money from Ryder's outstretched hand. He shoved it at Penelope without looking at her. "Consider yourself paid and fired." "Actually," Ryder drawled, "I believe I just paid her wages. You can return that money to me at your convenience, Mr. Wilkes." A few chuckles came from the crowd, quickly silenced by Wilkes's murderous glare. "You'll regret this," Wilkes hissed, looking between Ryder and Penelope before storming back into his hotel, the door slamming behind him. As the crowd began to disperse, Penelope turned to the stranger, clutching the unexpected bounty in her trembling hands. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Sutton," she said, her voice unsteady with emotion. "But this is far more than I'm owed. I can't possibly accept it." Ryder's weathered face softened slightly. "Keep it. Sounds like your brother needs medicine and winter's coming on." "But why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, genuine confusion in her hazel eyes. He adjusted his hat, squinting at the setting sun. "Let's just say I've seen too many good folks ground under the boot of men like Wilkes." After a pause, he added, "And my mother raised me better than to stand by while a lady was being wronged." For the first time, Penelope smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to luminous. "Then she raised you well, Mr. Sutton." "Ryder," he corrected. "Just Ryder." "I'm Penelope Norwood," she offered, extending her hand. "Penny to my friends." He took her hand gently, and a current passed between them that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. "Are you staying in town long?" she asked, releasing his hand a moment later than strictly necessary. A shadow crossed his face. "Not sure yet. Got some business to attend to first." "Well, Ryder," she said with newfound confidence, "when you figure it out, I make the best apple pie in Inyo County. It seems the least I can offer in thanks." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I might just take you up on that, Miss Norwood." As he tipped his hat and turned to lead his horse toward the livery stable, Penelope watched him go, the money still clutched in her hands. She didn't know who Ryder Sutton was, or what had brought him to Panamint, but for the first time in weeks, hope flickered in her heart like a campfire in the vast desert night. What neither of them noticed was Jasper Wilkes watching from the hotel window, his face twisted with malice as he pulled a man in a black coat aside to whisper urgent instructions. The next morning found Penelope at her brother's bedside, spooning broth between his pale lips. At 18, Peter Norwood should have been full of vigor, but the lung fever that had plagued him since childhood had left him frail and thin. "You should have seen it, Peter," Penelope said as she adjusted his pillows. "This stranger just appeared out of nowhere and made old Wilkes pay up right there in the street." Peter managed a weak smile. "Sounds like something from one of those dime novels. He was so confident," she continued, trying to find the right words. "Not arrogant like some of those mining men who come through, but sure of himself. Like he knew exactly who he was and what was right. And handsome too, I bet," Peter teased, his voice raspy. Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I hardly noticed." "Liar," Peter chuckled before breaking into a coughing fit. Penelope quickly helped him sit up, holding a handkerchief to his mouth until the spasm passed. When she pulled it away, she was relieved to see no blood, a good sign. "We'll get you to that specialist in San Francisco yet," she promised. "Mr. Sutton's generosity puts us much closer to having enough." "This mysterious cowboy have a first name, Ryder," she said, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. "Well, I hope I get to meet this Ryder Sutton and thank him properly," Peter said, settling back against his pillows. Not many men would stand up to Wilkes that way. Penelope nodded, thinking of the risk Ryder had taken. In a town where Wilkes controlled so much, making an enemy of him wasn't wise. "I hope he stays long enough for you to meet him too." After ensuring Peter was comfortable, Penelope headed to Doc Sullivan's office to purchase the medicine her brother needed. The elderly physician raised his eyebrows at the money she placed on his counter. "Seems your fortunes have improved, Miss Norwood," he observed, carefully counting out the drops for Peter's tonic. "I finally got my wages from Mr. Wilkes," she said, not elaborating. The doctor's bushy eyebrows rose even higher. "Did you now?" "That's not what I heard in the Lucky Strike this morning," Penelope sighed. Of course the entire town was already talking about yesterday's confrontation. "What are they saying?" "That some cowboy forced Wilkes to pay you triple at gunpoint," Doc Sullivan said with a wry smile. "Though I suspect that's gained something in the telling." "There was no gun," Penelope clarified quickly. "Mr. Sutton simply persuaded him that it was in his best interest to pay what was owed." "Sutton," the doctor paused in his measuring. "Not Ryder Sutton." Penelope's interest piqued. "You know him?" The old doctor carefully corked the medicine bottle before answering. "Not personally, but the name's known in these parts. Used to ride with the Rangers in Texas, if it's the same man. Has a reputation for finding trouble or trouble finding him." "He didn't seem like a troublemaker," Penelope mused. "Just the opposite, in fact." "Didn't say he made the trouble, just that he finds it," Doc Sullivan corrected, handing her the medicine. "Man's got a strong sense of justice from what I hear. Doesn't abide bullies or those who prey on the weak." As Penelope left the doctor's office, her mind turned over this new information. A Texas Ranger, or former Ranger at least. That explained the confidence, the way he carried himself. But what was he doing in Panamint? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sight of Ryder himself, emerging from the general store across the street. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. He wasn't conventionally handsome like the dandies who sometimes passed through on their way to San Francisco, but there was something compelling about his features, a strength and steadiness that drew the eye. He spotted her almost immediately, nodding and greeting as he crossed the dusty street. "Miss Norwood," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "How's your brother this morning?" "A bit stronger, thank you," she replied, surprised he'd remembered. "I've just bought his medicine." Ryder glanced at the bottle in her hand. "Good. Glad I could help with that." An awkward silence fell between them. the kind that happens when strangers connected by an intense moment find themselves meeting again in ordinary circumstances. "I hear you used to be a Texas Ranger," Penelope finally said. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. News travels fast in small towns, especially when someone stands up to Jasper Wilkes, she agreed. "Is it true?" "Was a ranger for 8 years," he confirmed with a nod. "Hung up the badge 2 years back." "To do what?" He hesitated. "Been doing some work for the Pinkerton agency. Following leads." That explained his presence in Panamint, Penelope thought. The Pinkertons were known for tracking down criminals and investigating all manner of cases. "Is that what brings you here? Following a lead?" His eyes, bluer than she'd realized yesterday, studied her face. "Something like that." Before she could ask more questions, a commotion from the direction of the livery stable caught their attention. A group of men were gathered around something on the ground, their voices raised in alarm. Without a word, Ryder started toward the disturbance, his long strides eating up the distance. Penelope hesitated only a moment before following, tucking the medicine bottle safely in her pocket. As they approached, the crowd parted slightly, revealing a man lying in the dirt, blood seeping from a wound on his head. Penelope recognized him as Thomas Quinn, the livery stable owner. Ryder knelt beside the injured man. "What happened?" "Jumped me," Quinn gasped, clutching his side. "3 of them took your horse." Ryder's expression hardened. "When?" "Not 10 minutes ago," Quinn managed. "Headed east toward the pass." Doc Sullivan pushed through the gathering onlookers. "Let me see him," he ordered, taking Ryder's place beside the wounded man. As the doctor examined Quinn, Ryder stood, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Anyone see who did this?" The bystanders exchanged glances, but no one spoke up. "They wore bandanas," Quinn added weakly. "But the leader had a scar, right eyebrow to cheek." Ryder's jaw tightened. "Marcus Holt," he muttered, almost to himself. "You know him?" Penelope asked. "He's why I'm here," Ryder replied grimly, already turning toward the general store. "Holt's wanted for murder in 3 territories." Penelope followed him, watching as he strode purposefully to where the shopkeeper kept a selection of weapons. "You're going after them? Alone?" "No choice," he said, examining a rifle. "They won't get far on my horse. She has a trick knee that acts up if you don't know how to handle her." "They'll figure that out soon enough. But if this man is as dangerous as you say, all the more reason not to let him get away." Ryder placed money on the counter for the rifle and ammunition. "I've been tracking Holt for 2 months, not about to lose him now." "This seems like a job for the sheriff," Penelope argued. "Sheriff Palmer rode out to the Crawford mine this morning," the shopkeeper interjected as he bagged Ryder's purchases. "Won't be back till tomorrow at least." Ryder nodded his thanks and headed for the door. Penelope rushed after him, catching his arm. "This is foolish," she insisted. "At least take someone with you." His expression softened slightly at her concern. "Miss Norwood, Penny," she corrected automatically. "Penny," he amended. "I appreciate your concern, but this is what I do." "Holt's already killed 4 men and a woman. I can't risk him getting away." She could see the determination in his eyes and knew arguing further would be pointless. "Then at least let me lend you a horse. Our farm is just outside of town. We have a good stallion that could keep up with your mare once you find her." Ryder hesitated, clearly weighing the offer against the need for haste. "It's faster than trying to rent another mount," she added practically. "And you'd be doing me a favor." "I still owe you for yesterday." After a brief internal struggle, he nodded. "Much obliged, but we need to move quickly." "We," she repeated, surprised. "I'm not taking you after Holt," he clarified firmly, "but I'll need you to show me to your farm and the horse." 15 minutes later, they were on the outskirts of Panamint, approaching the modest Norwood farmhouse. It was a simple structure, weathered by sun and wind, but well maintained. A small barn stood nearby, alongside a corral where a handsome chestnut stallion raised his head at their approach. "That's Thunder," Penelope said as they dismounted from the livery horse they'd borrowed. "He's strong and sure-footed in rough country." Ryder approached the corral, letting the stallion catch his scent. "Good lines," he observed appreciatively. "Your father's horse." "Yes," she said, a note of sadness in her voice. "One of the few things we kept after he died. We couldn't bear to sell him." As Penelope gathered Thunder's tack from the barn, Ryder took a moment to survey the small farm. The fields were fallow now, the irrigation ditches dry. A few chickens scratched in the yard, but otherwise there were few signs of a working farm. "You two manage this place alone?" he asked when she returned. "We try," she said, setting about saddling Thunder. "When Peter's well enough, he helps with what he can. We lease most of the land to the Hendersons next door. Between that and my wages from town jobs, we get by." Ryder noted the pride in her voice despite their obvious struggles. "Your brother's illness, has he had it long?" "Since he was 12, she said, deftly securing the cinch. "It comes and goes. The doctor in San Francisco thinks there might be a treatment that could help him, but—" She shrugged. "It costs money to travel, more to stay there during treatment. That's why you couldn't afford to lose those wages," Ryder concluded. "Every dollar counts," she confirmed, handing him Thunder's reins. "He's all the family I have left." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of shared experience. Ryder had the look of someone who understood loss. "I'll bring Thunder back," he promised. "You have my word." "I know you will," she said with surprising certainty. Then, impulsively, she reached out and squeezed his hand. "Be careful, Ryder. Wilkes knows everyone in this county. If those men took your horse, it might not be coincidence." His expression darkened at the implication. "You think Wilkes put Holt up to this?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But Wilkes doesn't take humiliation well, and you humiliated him publicly yesterday." Ryder considered this as he mounted Thunder, adjusting to the stallion's different gait and feel. "All the more reason to catch up to them quickly," he said grimly. "Bolt the doors tonight, Penny. Don't open for anyone but me or the sheriff." She nodded, suddenly afraid not for herself, but for this man she barely knew yet already cared about more than she should. "I'll be back by nightfall if I can," he added, gathering the reins. "If not—" "You will be," she said firmly. With a final nod, he turned Thunder toward the eastern hills and urged him into a gallop, dust rising behind him as he rode in pursuit of dangerous men. Penelope watched until he disappeared from sight, then hurried inside to check on Peter. Her brother was sleeping peacefully, his breathing less labored than it had been in days. The medicine was already helping. As she straightened his room and prepared their midday meal, Penelope found her thoughts continually returning to Ryder. She barely knew him, yet there was something about him that inspired both confidence and concern. She hoped he would return safely, and not just because of Thunder. By late afternoon, clouds were gathering over the Panamint Range, unusual for this time of year. Penelope glanced anxiously toward the eastern hills, where the approaching storm was darkest. If Ryder was still out there, he'd be riding into bad weather. A knock at the door startled her from her worries. Remembering Ryder's warning, she approached cautiously. "Who is it?" she called through the wooden door. "Eliza Crawford, dear. I've brought that remedy for Peter I promised." Penelope relaxed at the familiar voice of their neighbor, a kind widow who often checked on them. She opened the door to find Eliza on the porch, clutching a jar of honey mixed with herbs. "You're an angel," Penelope said gratefully, ushering the older woman inside. "Peter's sleeping now, but this will soothe his throat when he wakes. Thought I'd better bring it before this storm hits," Eliza said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Looks like a gully washer coming." As they talked, Eliza noticed Penelope's frequent glances toward the window. Expecting someone, briefly, Penelope explained about Ryder and the stolen horse. Eliza's weathered face creased with concern. "Chasing after Marcus Holt. That's a fool's errand if I ever heard one." "You know this Holt?" "Know of him," Eliza clarified. "My late husband used to be marshal over in Lone Pine. Holt's reputation is well-earned cold-blooded killer with no conscience. Travels with two brothers just as mean." This did nothing to ease Penelope's growing anxiety. Ryder seemed confident he could handle them. "Maybe he can," Eliza acknowledged, "but not if Jasper Wilkes has a hand in it." "What do you mean?" The older woman lowered her voice, though there was no one else to hear. "Saw Wilkes at his hotel this morning, talking with some rough-looking men I didn't recognize. One had a nasty scar down his face." Penelope's blood ran cold. "You think Wilkes hired Holt to go after Ryder?" "Can't say for certain," Eliza admitted. "But Wilkes was mighty angry about yesterday. Word is, he's been telling everyone your cowboy robbed him." "That's not true." Penelope protested. "Ryder made him pay what was rightfully mine. Truth doesn't matter much to a man like Wilkes when his pride's been hurt," Eliza said grimly. "If he's in league with Holt, your friend could be riding into more trouble than he bargained for." As if emphasizing her words, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. Penelope moved to the window, staring out at the threatening sky. Somewhere out there, Ryder was tracking dangerous men, possibly unaware that he himself was the intended prey. "I should warn the sheriff," she decided. "He's still at the Crawford mine," Eliza reminded her. "Won't be back till morning at the earliest." "Then I need to find Ryder myself," Penelope said, making up her mind. Eliza caught her arm as she turned toward the door. "That's madness, girl. You can't go chasing after outlaws in a storm." "I know these hills better than any of them," Penelope argued. "There are old mining trails that could let me circle around and find Ryder without crossing Holt's path." "And what about Peter?" Eliza asked reasonably. "You can't leave him alone." Penelope hesitated, torn between her worry for Ryder and her responsibility to her brother. Eliza sighed, seeing her distress. "I'll stay with Peter," she finally offered. "My arthritis tells me this storm will be a bad one. I shouldn't be traveling back home anyway." "Are you sure?" "I've nursed sicker men than your brother," the widow said with gruff affection. "Go, if you must. But be careful, Penelope. Take your father's old rifle and don't take chances." Gratitude flooded through Penelope as she hugged the older woman. "I'll be back as soon as I can." "If Peter wakes, tell him. I'll tell him you're fetching medicine from town," Eliza said firmly. "No need to worry the boy." Within minutes, Penelope had changed into her sturdiest clothes, packed supplies, and retrieved her father's Winchester from its place above the mantel. After checking on Peter one last time, she slipped out to the barn where the old farm horse, Daisy, waited. "Not as fast as thunder," she murmured to the placid mare as she saddled her, "but you know these hills as well as I do." As she mounted, the first fat raindrops began to fall, pattering against the barn roof. The storm was moving in faster than she'd anticipated. "Keep him safe until I find him," she whispered to whatever power might be listening, then urged Daisy out into the gathering tempest. Miles away, Ryder crouched behind a jumble of rocks, watching the three men in the canyon below. They had indeed been slowed by his mare's temperamental knee, just as he'd predicted. Now they were making camp in the shelter of an overhanging cliff, apparently planning to wait out the approaching storm. Thunder stood quietly behind him, tethered to a scrub pine. The stallion had proven himself worthy of Penelope's praise, carrying Ryder swiftly and surely through the increasingly rough terrain. Ryder studied the men through a brass spyglass. Marcus Holt was unmistakable with his scarred face and massive frame. The other two, his younger brothers, according to the wanted posters, were setting up camp, while Marcus examined the leg of Ryder's mare. What troubled Ryder was the conversation he'd overheard as he'd approached their position. They weren't simply fleeing with a stolen horse. They were waiting for someone who'd paid them to take care of the Pinkerton man, as the youngest Holt had put it, Jasper Wilkes. It had to be. Somehow Wilkes had discovered Ryder's identity and arranged this ambush. But why? Ryder hadn't come to Panamint looking for Wilkes. His assignment was to track down the Holt brothers for the murders they'd committed in Arizona. Unless Wilkes and the Holts had prior connections, that would explain a lot, including why the notorious outlaws had been in Panamint to begin with. A rumble of thunder, closer now, interrupted his thoughts. The storm was nearly upon them, dark clouds swallowing the afternoon light. He needed to make his move before visibility worsened further. Carefully, Ryder checked his weapons, the new rifle, his Colt revolver, and the knife in his boot. 3 against 1 weren't favorable odds, but he'd faced worse. The key would be to separate them if possible. Another sound caught his attention: hoofbeats, approaching from the west. Ryder tensed, wondering if Wilkes himself was coming to ensure the job was done. He adjusted his position to see the new arrival, then froze in disbelief. It was Penelope. She was riding an old mare along the ridge trail, her slender form hunched against the increasing rain. Even from this distance, Ryder could see she was armed with a rifle. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. What was she thinking coming out here? And how had she found him? Below, the Holts had also heard the approaching Ryder. Marcus gestured to his brothers, who quickly doused their small fire and drew their weapons. Ryder knew he had seconds to act. If Penelope rode into their ambush, she wouldn't stand a chance. Abandoning his plan for a measured approach, he raised his rifle, took aim at the ground near the Holt's feet, and fired. The shot echoed through the canyon, causing all 3 Holts to dive for cover. On the ridge, Penelope reined in sharply, scanning for the source of the gunfire. Ryder stood, waving his arm to catch her attention, then urgently motioned for her to get down. To his relief, she understood immediately, dismounting and pulling her horse behind a large boulder. But now the Holts knew someone was watching them. Return fire ricocheted off the rocks near Ryder's position, forcing him back into cover. "Come on out, Sutton," Marcus Holt's voice boomed across the canyon. "We know it's you. How much is Wilkes paying you, Holt?" Ryder called back, trying to keep them talking while he maneuvered for a better position. A harsh laugh answered him. "Enough to make it worth our while. He's got quite a grudge against you." "For what?" "I just got to town yesterday. Seems you interfered with his business," came the reply. "And Wilkes don't like interference." Another shot struck closer to Ryder's position, sending stone chips flying. The Holts were spreading out, trying to flank him. Meanwhile, the storm was intensifying, rain now falling in sheets that reduced visibility to mere yards. Ryder needed to reach Penelope before the Holts did. He calculated the distance to her position, about 100 yards along the ridgeline. Moving quickly but silently, he worked his way through the rocks, using the storm as cover. He'd nearly reached her when a figure loomed through the rain, the youngest Holt brother, rifle raised and searching. Ryder froze, waiting until the man's back was turned, then closed the distance in 3 swift strides, bringing the butt of his rifle down on the outlaw's head. The man crumpled without a sound. Quickly binding and gagging his unconscious opponent, Ryder continued toward Penelope's position. He found her exactly where he'd seen her take cover, her back against the boulder, rifle ready. "Ryder," she gasped when he appeared through the rain. "Thank God." "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, crouching beside her. "Warning you," she said, rain dripping from her hat brim. "Wilkes hired those men to kill you. My neighbor saw them talking this morning." "I figured that out," he said grimly, "but you shouldn't have come yourself." "It's too dangerous." "There was no one else," she replied simply. Despite the dire situation, something warmed in Ryder's chest at her courage. Few women, few people of any kind would have ridden into a storm to warn a virtual stranger. "One down, 2 to go," he said, nodding toward where he'd left the unconscious Holt. "But we need to move. They'll realize their brother is missing soon." "There's a line shack about half a mile north," Penelope said, pointing through the rain. "Old mining company built it years ago. We could hole up there until the storm passes." Ryder hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Lead the way. Stay low and move fast." They retrieved their horses and set off through the driving rain, keeping to the tree line where possible. The storm had become a full-blown tempest, lightning cracking across the sky and thunder booming through the canyons. It provided excellent cover for their escape, but made travel treacherous on the increasingly muddy trails. After 20 minutes of careful progress, a small wooden structure came into view, the line shack Penelope had mentioned. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a sagging roof, but right now it looked like paradise to Ryder. They approached cautiously, Ryder insisting on checking the interior before allowing Penelope to enter. Finding it empty, they quickly brought the horses inside as well, the small space barely accommodating them all. "Not exactly the Palmer house," Ryder commented as they shook off the rain, "but it'll do." Penelope wrung water from her hair, her clothes clinging to her slender frame. "There should be some dry firewood in that bin," she said, pointing to a crude wooden box near the small stone fireplace. "Miners keep these shacks stocked for emergencies." Sure enough, the bin contained enough wood for a small fire. As Ryder set about lighting it, Penelope tended to the horses, murmuring reassurances to the nervous animals. "How did you find me?" Ryder asked as the kindling caught and small flames began to dance. "I know these hills," she said simply. "And I figured you'd follow the eastern trail. It's the only route passable on horseback through these parts. When I saw your mare's tracks diverting north toward the canyon, I followed." "You tracked me?" he asked, impressed despite himself. A small smile touched her lips. "My father taught me well. He was a prospector before he settled down to farm, said a person should always be able to find their way home, no matter how far they wander." The fire was building now, casting warm light through the small space and highlighting the golden strands in Penelope's damp hair. She moved to stand beside it, stretching her hands toward the heat. "Thank you," Ryder said quietly, "for the warning, and for coming after me. Not many would have." She looked up at him, her hazel eyes reflecting the firelight. "You stood up for me when no one else would. I couldn't do less for you." For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence, the patter of rain on the roof and the crackle of the fire the only sounds. Ryder found himself noticing details about her he hadn't before: the spray of freckles across her nose, the determined set of her chin, the quiet strength in her slender shoulders. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said finally, breaking the spell. "You'll catch your death." "And wear what?" she asked practically. Ryder rummaged in his saddlebag, producing a relatively dry shirt. "It's not much, but it's better than what you've got on." Penelope accepted it with a grateful nod. "Turn around," she instructed. Ryder obliged, focusing his attention on the cabin's single window while behind him came the rustle of wet clothing being removed. The storm outside was intensifying. Sheets of rain now mixed with occasional hail that bounced off the wooden roof. "You can turn back now," she said after a minute. He did, finding her wrapped in his shirt, which hung to her knees like a dress. She'd spread her wet clothing near the fire to dry. The sight of her in his garments stirred something primal in him that he quickly tamped down. "What's the plan?" she asked, settling on a rough wooden stool near the fire. "Wait out the storm," he replied, forcing his mind back to their predicament. "The Holts won't move in this weather either, especially with one of them out of commission. And then I finish what I came to do," he said grimly. "Bring them to justice." Penelope studied his face in the firelight. "This is more than just a job to you, isn't it?" Ryder was silent for a long moment, debating how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "The woman they killed in Tucson. She was engaged to my best friend, a school teacher who witnessed a robbery they committed. They silenced her before she could testify." Understanding dawned in Penelope's eyes. "I'm sorry. My friend never recovered from losing her," Ryder continued, his voice low. "Took his own life 6 months later, so yes, it's more than a job." "That's why you left the Rangers," he nodded. "Needed more freedom to pursue certain cases. The Pinkertons gave me that." Thunder crashed outside, so loud it seemed directly overhead. Penelope jumped slightly, then gave a self-conscious smile. "Sorry, never liked storms much." "They can be beautiful, though," Ryder observed, "once you've made peace with their power." "Is that a metaphor, Mr. Sutton?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite their situation. For the first time since she'd known him, Ryder smiled, fully a transformation that lightened his entire countenance. "Maybe so, Miss Norwood." They talked through the evening as the storm raged on, the small fire keeping the worst of the chill at bay. Penelope told him about her parents, her father's dreams of striking it rich in the Panamint silver mines, her mother's determined efforts to create a home in this harsh landscape. She spoke of Peter's illness and their struggles since being orphaned. In turn, Ryder shared stories of his own growing up on a small ranch in West Texas, joining the Rangers after his parents died in a Comanche raid, the cases he'd worked, and the places he'd seen. He found himself revealing more than he had to anyone in years, drawn by her attentive listening and thoughtful questions. As night deepened, and the storm showed no signs of abating, they shared the simple provisions Penelope had brought: jerky, hard biscuits, and a canteen of water. "Not exactly the apple pie I promised you," she said apologetically as they ate. "I'll hold you to that when we get back," he replied. When exhaustion finally caught up with them, they arranged their saddles and blankets near the fire. Despite Ryder's insistence that he could keep watch, his eyes grew heavy as the warmth and the steady drumming of rain lulled him toward sleep. The last thing he saw before drifting off was Penelope's face in the dying firelight, her expression peaceful despite the danger that waited beyond the cabin walls. Morning arrived with unexpected brightness, the storm having passed during the night, leaving behind a washed, clean world glittering with dew. Ryder woke first, momentarily disoriented until his gaze fell on Penelope, still sleeping wrapped in his shirt, her honey-brown hair spread across the makeshift pillow. Something shifted in his chest at the sight, a recognition that his interest in this woman had become more than casual admiration. He'd known her barely 2 days, yet she'd already shown more courage and integrity than most people he'd met in a lifetime. Quietly, so as not to wake her, Ryder moved to the window to assess their situation. The canyon below was transformed by the storm. A flash flood had carved through it during the night, leaving behind a swath of mud and debris. No sign of the Holts or their camp remained visible. "They've moved on," came Penelope's voice from behind him. Ryder turned to find her awake, sitting up and brushing hair from her face. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well. Better than I expected to, she admitted, reaching for her now dry clothes. The storm, passed in the night, took half the canyon with it from the looks of things. She nodded, glancing toward the window. The Holts will be heading for the pass. It's the only way through to the next valley if the canyon's flooded. You're not coming with me, Ryder said firmly, anticipating her thoughts. I'm taking you back to town, then going after them alone. Penelope's chin lifted in that determined way he was coming to recognize. The pass is treacherous after a storm. You need someone who knows the terrain. What I need is to know you're safe, he countered. These men are killers, Penny. And Jasper Wilkes hired them to kill you, she reminded him. If you go after them alone, you're playing into his hands. Ryder ran a hand through his hair in frustration. She wasn't wrong, but the thought of putting her in further danger was unacceptable. At least let me guide you to the pass, she suggested as a compromise. Once we're there, I'll stay back while you do what you need to do. After a tense standoff, Ryder reluctantly agreed. They quickly readied themselves and the horses, stepping out into the crisp morning air. The storm had cleared the heat, leaving behind a rare coolness that would soon dissipate as the sun climbed higher. As Penelope had predicted, the canyon trail was impassable, a muddy torrent still flowing where the path had been. Instead, they took a higher route, climbing steadily through pine-dotted slopes toward the pass. Ryder, Penelope said after they'd been riding for an hour. What happens after, when you've caught the Holts? He glanced at her, noting the careful neutrality in her tone. I take them to the territorial marshal in Independence, then head back to San Francisco to report to the agency. I see, she said, her eyes fixed on the trail ahead. Unless. She looked up, a question in her gaze. Unless there's a reason to stay in Panamint a while longer, he finished, his meaning clear in his eyes. A soft blush colored her cheeks as she held his gaze. There might be, she admitted, especially if someone were interested in trying that apple pie. The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of voices carrying on the still morning air. Ryder immediately reined in, signaling for Penelope to do the same. They dismounted, tethering the horses out of sight before creeping forward to the edge of a rocky outcrop. Below them, perhaps half a mile away, the Holt brothers were making their way along a narrow ledge trail, leading their horses single file. Ryder's mare was still with them, limping noticeably now. Only 2 men were visible, Marcus and the middle brother. The youngest is missing, Ryder whispered. Must still be unconscious where I left him. Or looking for us, Penelope suggested grimly. As if summoned by her words, the click of a gun hammer sounded behind them. Don't move, came a rough voice. They turned slowly to find the youngest Holt brother, a purpling bruise on his temple where Ryder had struck him. His revolver was aimed steadily at Penelope's chest. Hands where I can see him, he ordered. You cost me a miserable night in the rain, Sutton. Marcus ain't gonna be happy I let you get the drop on me. Ryder raised his hands slowly, his mind racing through options. The young outlaw looked unsteady on his feet, likely concussed from the blow he'd received, but his gun hand was steady enough. Let the woman go, Ryder said evenly. She's not part of this. Holt spat on the ground. She's with you, ain't she? That makes her part of it. Your quarrel is with me, Ryder insisted. Wilkes paid you to deal with me, not her. At the mention of Wilkes, something flickered in the young outlaw's eyes. How'd you know about that? Wilkes isn't exactly subtle, Ryder replied, trying to keep him talking while inching almost imperceptibly to his left, away from Penelope. What's he got on you boys anyway? Must be something big to make the infamous Holt brothers do his dirty work. The young man's face darkened. Ain't your concern? Sure it is, Ryder pressed. Man in my line of work likes to know who's paying to have him killed. While Ryder kept the outlaw's attention, Penelope had shifted her weight, her hand drifting toward her boot. Ryder had noticed earlier that she kept a small knife there, a fact the young Holt seemed unaware of. "Shut up and start walking," Holt ordered. "Marcus wants to see you before we finish this job." "And then what?" "You go back to Wilkes for your payment," Ryder asked, taking a deliberate step that placed him more directly in the outlaw's line of sight, shielding Penelope. "You boys really think he's going to pay up after you do his dirty work? Man doesn't even pay his honest employees." Doubt crept into the young man's expression. "He gave us half up front. And let me guess the rest when the job's done. When you've committed murder for him and he's the only one who knows it." Ryder shook his head. "That's not how men like Wilkes operate. He'll have you eliminated too once you've served your purpose. No loose ends." The outlaw's gun wavered slightly. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask yourself why a respectable businessman would hire known killers instead of handling things legally. Wilkes owns half the town. He could have had me arrested if he wanted to, but instead he sends you after me in secret. Why?" Before Holt could respond, a sharp whistle sounded from below, Marcus calling for his brother. "We're going down there," Holt decided, gesturing with his gun. "Now, James," Marcus's voice echoed up from the trail. "Where are you, boy?" The momentary distraction was all Penelope needed. In one fluid motion, she drew the knife from her boot and flung it with surprising accuracy. It struck the young outlaw's gun hand, not deeply, but enough to make him cry out and drop his weapon. Ryder lunged forward, tackling him before he could recover. They grappled briefly before Ryder landed a solid blow to the already bruised temple. The young man went limp. "Where did you learn to throw a knife like that?" Ryder asked, breathing hard as he quickly bound the unconscious outlaw. "My father taught all his children useful skills," Penelope replied, retrieving her knife. "Said a woman should know how to protect herself in these parts." From below came shouts as Marcus Holt realized something was wrong. "James, answer me, damn it." "They'll be coming for us now," Ryder said grimly, checking his weapons. "Take the horses and circle back to town. Get the sheriff if he's returned." "I'm not leaving you," Penelope insisted. "Penny, please, I can handle this better knowing you're safe." She stared at him for a long moment, then did something that caught him completely off guard. She stepped forward, placed her hands on either side of his face, and kissed him firmly on the lips. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with emotion. "That's a promise," she said softly. "I expect you to collect on the rest when this is over." Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the trees toward where they'd left the horses. Ryder touched his lips briefly, still feeling the warmth of hers, then turned his attention back to the task at hand. The Holt brothers were climbing now, abandoning their horses on the narrow trail in favor of faster movement. Ryder positioned himself behind a large boulder, rifle ready. He had the advantage of higher ground and cover, but they had the advantage of numbers. As the older Holts came into view, Ryder called out, "That's far enough. I've got your brother and I've got you in my sights." Marcus Holt, a massive man with the promised scar splitting his weathered face, paused, squinting up the slope. "Sutton, I'm gonna enjoy killing you slow for this trouble." "Your brother's alive," Ryder replied. "Keep coming and that might change." "You're outnumbered, lawman," the middle Holt called, edging to one side in an attempt to flank Ryder's position. "Not for long," Ryder returned confidently. "Sheriff and his posse are on their way." "Seems your friend Wilkes didn't cover his tracks as well as he thought." This was a gamble. The sheriff might not even be back in Panamint yet, let alone on his way here, but the Holts didn't know that. Marcus spat on the ground. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Why do you think your brother didn't come back last night? We found him, and he was real talkative about your arrangement with Wilkes." Uncertainty flickered across the outlaw's scarred face. James wouldn't talk. "Everyone talks when the alternative is hanging," Ryder said coldly. "And right now, you boys are looking at murder charges in 3 territories. That's a guaranteed date with the gallows." The brothers exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Ryder knew he needed to press his advantage before they realized he was alone. "Here's how this ends," he continued, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "You throw down your weapons and surrender peacefully. In return, I'll put in a word about your cooperation when it comes time for sentencing." "And if we don't?" Marcus demanded. Ryder's voice hardened. "Then I start shooting, and I promise you, I won't miss. Your brother goes back in a pine box instead of a jail cell." For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, to Ryder's surprise, the middle Holt slowly lowered his rifle to the ground. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus snarled at his brother. "I ain't hanging, Mark," the man replied wearily. "We've had a good run, but it's over." Marcus's face contorted with rage, but after a moment of internal struggle, he too placed his weapon on the ground. "This ain't finished, Sutton," he growled. "Yes, it is," Ryder said, emerging carefully from his cover, rifle still trained on the brothers. "On the ground, face down, hands behind your backs." As he bound the surrendering outlaws, Ryder heard the approach of horses, multiple riders, by the sound. His grip tightened on his rifle, prepared for the possibility that more of Wilkes's hired guns were arriving. Instead, Penelope appeared around the bend, accompanied by Sheriff Palmer and 2 deputies. Her face broke into a relieved smile when she saw Ryder standing over the captured Holts. "Found the sheriff just riding back into town," she called as they approached. "Thought you might appreciate some official assistance." Sheriff Palmer, a grizzled veteran with a no-nonsense demeanor, dismounted with a grunt. "Miss Norwood's been filling me in on your situation, Sutton. Says you're a Pinkerton man tracking these outlaws." Ryder nodded, handing over the reins of the situation and the prisoners to the local lawman. As the deputies secured the Holt brothers, Ryder moved to Penelope's side. "Thought I told you to go back to town," he said quietly. "You did," she agreed, her eyes twinkling, "but I never promised to stay there." Despite himself, Ryder laughed. "Remind me never to play poker with you, Penny Norwood." "Smart man," she replied with a smile, "though I might let you win a hand or two depending on the stakes." The ride back to Panamint took most of the day, the procession moving slowly with 3 prisoners in tow. Sheriff Palmer had been particularly interested to hear about Wilkes's involvement, though he admitted it would be difficult to prove without more evidence. "Man's got influence," the sheriff explained as they rode. "Not just here, but all through the county. Judge Harmon's in his pocket, for one." "What about the Holt's testimony?" Ryder asked. Palmer shook his head. "Word of known outlaws against a respected businessman wouldn't hold up." Penelope, riding beside them, frowned. "So he just gets away with it? After hiring killers and cheating his employees?" "Not necessarily," Ryder said thoughtfully. "Sometimes justice takes different forms." It was nearly sunset when they reached the outskirts of Panamint. News of the capture had somehow preceded them, and a crowd had gathered to witness the notorious Holt brothers being brought to justice. Whispers rippled through the onlookers as the procession made its way toward the jail. Among the spectators, Jasper Wilkes stood outside his hotel, his face a mask of controlled neutrality that slipped momentarily when he spotted Ryder riding alongside the sheriff. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and Ryder saw the flash of alarm before Wilkes composed himself. As the prisoners were escorted into the jail, Ryder dismounted and approached Wilkes, who was already trying to retreat into his hotel. "Mr. Wilkes," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "A word, if you please." The hotel owner paused, clearly calculating the risks of refusing such a public request. With forced joviality, he turned back. "Mr. Sutton, I hear congratulations are in order for capturing those outlaws." "Interesting you should say that," Ryder replied, stopping a few feet from Wilkes. "I don't recall mentioning to anyone why I was in Panamint." Wilkes's smile froze. "Word travels in small towns." "Indeed it does," Ryder agreed pleasantly. "Including word about businessmen who hire killers to eliminate those who cross them." The crowd, which had been dispersing, paused at this dramatic turn. Wilkes's face flushed red. "That's a serious accusation, sir. One I'd advise you not to make without proof." "Oh, I have proof," Ryder said confidently. "The Holt brothers were very forthcoming once they realized you'd likely double-cross them." This was another bluff. The Holts had admitted nothing about Wilkes, but judging by the hotel owner's expression, it had hit home. "This is slander," Wilkes blustered, looking around at the gathering crowd. "Sheriff, are you going to allow this man to make such accusations?" Sheriff Palmer, who had emerged from the jail, merely folded his arms. "Free country, Wilkes. Man can speak his mind." Penelope had joined them now, standing slightly behind Ryder. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Wilkes didn't just hire outlaws to kill Mr. Sutton. He's been cheating his employees for years. I'm not the first he's denied honest wages to." Murmurs of agreement came from the crowd, particularly from several women who had also worked at the hotel. "This is absurd," Wilkes sputtered. "I won't stand here and be insulted by a penniless orphan and a drifting gunman." "Then perhaps you'd prefer to explain to Judge Harmon why the notorious Holt brothers were carrying a bank draft with your signature," Ryder asked smoothly. "I've already sent it to Independence with a deputy. Should reach the judge by morning." This was his masterstroke, a complete fabrication, but delivered with such conviction that doubt flickered across Wilkes's face. Did he remember signing something the Holts might have kept? Could they have forged his signature on something incriminating? "That's impossible," Wilkes stammered, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Ryder pressed his advantage. "Here's what's going to happen, Wilkes. You're going to pay every employee you've cheated with interest. You're going to make a substantial donation to the town school. And you're going to sell your businesses and leave Panamint by the end of the month." "You can't force me to do anything," Wilkes protested. "No." Ryder looked around at the crowd, which had grown larger and was watching with undisguised interest. "Folks here seem mighty interested in learning more about your business practices. And I imagine the territorial governor might have questions too, once he receives my full report." Wilkes looked around desperately, seeking allies in the crowd but finding none. Even his usual supporters were watching with wary expressions, distancing themselves from potential scandal. "This is highway robbery," he hissed. "No," Ryder corrected him. "This is justice. Your choice, Wilkes. Make amends and leave with your freedom and what's left of your reputation, or face what's coming." For a long moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then Wilkes's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll do it. But this isn't over, Sutton." "Yes, it is," Ryder replied firmly. "For your sake, it had better be." As Wilkes slunk back into his hotel, the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement over the confrontation they'd just witnessed. Several people approached Penelope, offering support and sharing their own stories of Wilkes's mistreatment. Ryder stepped back, watching her accept their words with grace. She caught his eye over the shoulder of an elderly woman who was patting her hand, and the smile she gave him was full of promise. Later that evening, after the excitement had died down, Ryder and Penelope sat on the porch of the Norwood farmhouse, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Peter, feeling stronger after days of proper medication, had finally fallen asleep after insisting on hearing the full story of their adventure several times over. "You really think Wilkes will leave town?" Penelope asked, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. Ryder nodded. "He's a coward at heart, and with his reputation in tatters, he won't find much reason to stay." "What about the Holts? Sheriff's taking them to the territorial prison tomorrow. They'll stand trial for their crimes, including the murder in Tucson." Ryder's voice grew solemn. "It won't bring Julia back, but at least her killer will face justice." Penelope's hand found his in the darkness. "You honored your friend's memory by bringing them in. He would be proud." Ryder's fingers tightened around hers. "I have to return to San Francisco," he said after a moment. "Report to the agency." Her hand stiffened slightly in his. "I see. But I was thinking," he continued, turning to face her in the fading light, "that I might request a transfer to this region. The Pinkertons are expanding their operations in the Nevada and California territories. They could use experienced agents." Hope brightened her features. "You'd stay in Panamint if there was someone worth staying for," he replied softly. "I believe there might be," she whispered, leaning toward him, "though I still owe you that apple pie." "I aim to collect," he murmured before closing the distance between them. Their kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the intensity of emotions that had been building since their first meeting. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Penelope admitted, resting her forehead against his. "It seems impossible after just a few days." "Sometimes you just know," Ryder replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "My father used to say when it's right, time doesn't matter." She smiled at that. "My father would have liked you. He always said I needed someone as stubborn as I am." "Is that what I am?" Ryder asked with a chuckle. "Stubborn, among other things," she teased. "Brave, honorable, handsome when you're not covered in trail dust." "I'll have to remember to bathe more regularly," he said, pulling her closer. They talked long into the night, making plans both immediate and distant. Ryder would travel to San Francisco the following week, complete his assignment, and request his transfer. Penelope would continue caring for Peter, whose health was already showing improvement with proper treatment. "When I return," Ryder said as the moon climbed high overhead, "would you consider becoming Mrs. Sutton?" Penelope's eyes widened. "Are you proposing, Ryder Sutton?" "Inelegantly, perhaps," he admitted with a sheepish smile. "But yes, I am. I know it's sudden." She silenced him with a finger to his lips. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to become your wife." Joy such as Ryder had never known flooded through him as he gathered her in his arms. Whatever uncertainties the future held, one thing was clear: he had found his home at last. 1 year later, the Norwood farm had undergone a remarkable transformation. Fresh paint brightened the farmhouse, new fencing enclosed expanded fields, and the barn stood solid and repaired. Most significant was the new wing added to the house, a spacious bedroom and office for the farm's newest residents. Inside, Penelope Sutton hummed as she placed a freshly baked apple pie on the windowsill to cool, her wedding ring catching the late afternoon sunlight. From the porch came the sound of male laughter. Ryder and Peter discussing the latest improvements to the irrigation system. At 23, Peter had made a remarkable recovery over the past year. The specialist in San Francisco had indeed found a treatment that eased his symptoms, and the hard but rewarding work of farming had built his strength. He would never be robust, but he was healthy enough to lead a full life. Ryder had received his transfer to the Nevada and California territories as requested, but after 6 months with the Pinkertons, he had made another career change. The sheriff of Panamint had retired, and the town council, no longer under Wilkes's influence, had unanimously offered Ryder the position. As Sheriff Sutton, he maintained law and order in the growing mining town while helping Penelope and Peter manage the farm. The arrangement suited them all perfectly. Ryder's salary provided stability, while the farm was beginning to prosper again under their combined efforts. Jasper Wilkes had indeed left Panamint, selling his properties at a fraction of their worth in his haste to escape the scandal. The hotel was now run by a consortium of local businesspeople who ensured fair practices and honest wages. Several of Wilkes's former employees had received substantial settlements, using the funds to start businesses of their own. Penelope wiped her hands on her apron as she heard the front door open. Ryder appeared in the kitchen doorway, his sheriff's badge glinting on his chest. "Something smells wonderful," he said, crossing to kiss her cheek. "Apple pie, as promised," she replied with a smile. "Though you've collected on that promise many times over this past year. And I intend to keep collecting for the next 50 years, he said, drawing her into his arms. "Maybe longer." "Ambitious plans, Sheriff Sutton," she teased, though her eyes softened as she looked up at him. "I have news," he said, his expression growing more serious. "Got a telegram from the territorial governor today. Marcus Holt and his brothers have been sentenced. They'll hang next month for the murders in Tucson." Penelope squeezed his hand, knowing what this meant to him. "Your friend can rest easier now." Ryder nodded, his eyes distant for a moment before returning to meet hers. "I've been thinking about him a lot lately. About what he lost and what I found." He placed a hand gently on her slightly rounded belly. "This life we're building, it's more than I ever dared hope for." "We've both been blessed," she agreed, covering his hand with her own. "From the moment you made Jasper Wilkes pay triple in front of witnesses." Ryder laughed at the memory. "Best money I ever spent." Peter appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with an exaggerated expression of disgust. "Are you two being romantic again?" "Because I can come back after supper if you need some time alone." "Don't be ridiculous," Penelope scolded affectionately. "Set the table, please. The stew's nearly ready." As Peter good-naturedly complied, Ryder kept his arm around his wife, savoring the simple joy of the moment. Outside, the sun was setting over the Panamint Range, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside, the small farmhouse was filled with the aroma of home-cooked food and the warmth of family. "I love you, Penny Sutton," he murmured against her hair. "And I love you," she whispered back. "My stubborn, honorable, occasionally dusty cowboy." In the years that followed, the Sutton family would grow and prosper. Their first child, a son they named James after Ryder's father, would be joined by 2 sisters in due time. Peter would eventually marry the schoolteacher who came to Panamint in 1880, establishing his own home on the adjoining property. Ryder would serve as sheriff for 15 years, before being elected county judge, his reputation for fairness and integrity making him a natural choice for the position. Penelope would become known throughout the region for her community work, establishing a fund to help struggling families through hard times, a legacy of her own experiences. But through all the changes and challenges, they would always remember how their story began with a stranger who stood up for justice on a dusty street in Panamint, making a crooked employer pay triple in front of witnesses, and in the process, finding the love of his life.